Chairman, I have to get your reaction to Leader McConnell's filibuster threat earlier today that the Republicans, every one of them in the Senate, will not participate in any legislative activity until you have an agreement and get the tax rates fixed for next year.
Well, I certainly agree that we need to get the tax rates fixed for next year. There's no question about that. But to say that we can't do any other business until that's done is unfortunate because, as you know, the nation has a large unfinished agenda if we're going to get this economy moving again. So I don't think those kinds of lines in the sand do much good other than to send a political signal. And right now, I think what the country needs more than this kind of political gamesmanship is they need serious results for the nation.
Well, let's get to the question of taxes and how to fix this thing. I mean, at my distance now, I'm wondering what is the big problem. It's simply what's left politically and governing is a decision on what the top tax rate's going to be next year, because everything else in the tax rates has already been agreed to by both parties. And so I'm wondering what is preventing getting an agreement in the next hour and a half, the next 90 minutes between Chairman Baucus and others involved in how to go forward on that top tax rate.
Because, as you know, Lawrence, in this town there is always more than one agenda. And so not only is there the question of the top tax rate, there's a question of extending unemployment insurance benefits. There's a question of extending the debt limit. There's a question of what do you do with the other tax provisions that have to be extended every year that have not yet been done. What do you do about the estate tax? We don't have anything in place for next year other than to go back to the old rate of the estate tax, which I think no one thinks is the appropriate level going forward. So lots of other issues, and very hard to get them resolved in a short period of time, given the filibuster rule in the Senate, without some package being put together.
Now, I discussed the Bush tax rates with Congressman Hoyer last night on this show. Here's what he had to say. Congressman Hoyer, why is $250,000 the top threshold? Why is that the definition of rich, according to the Democratic Party in the House?
No, I don't know that it's a definition of rich. It is a definition of, and obviously any figure is somewhat arbitrary, but $200,000 for individuals and $250,000 for couples was felt to be a figure at which reasonable people could conclude they were certainly middle-income wage earners and that they ought not to receive a tax increase.
The $250,000 threshold is where everything seems to be stuck. There's been some discussion. Senator Schumer's talking about maybe raising this to a $1 million threshold. Do you think there might be some movement there on exactly what that number should be?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a possibility. But, Lawrence, let me just say this. From my own perspective, all of this misses the point because all of it's building on a tax code that is so deeply flawed, we really need to fundamentally reform it. If we're going to be as competitive as we can be going forward, if we're going to have as efficient a collection as we can, you know, the current system is hemorrhaging revenue to offshore tax havens, to abusive tax shelters. So I find the current debate very stale, and it really misses the point about what has to be done, which is to dramatically reduce tax expenditures and lower rates and make us more competitive and get the country back on track and generate the revenue we need to reduce this overwhelming debt.
And that is the issue that's addressed in the Commission on the Budget that you are a member of, the Bipartisan National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. That report is now out there, the so-called Simpson-Bowles plan. You've come out in favor of that plan. It is described by many as a generous tax cut for everyone, including the rich, taking the top bracket down from the 35 or 39, depending on where it would end up next year, down into the 20s. Is that a giveaway to the rich?
No, not at all, because it taxes all income, capital gains and dividends at ordinary income rates. So, for the very wealthy in this country, it is a big tax increase. That's a detail that's been missed in some of the reporting. So remember, capital gains and dividends taxed at ordinary rates, and the ordinary top rate would be 28%. That is almost a doubling of the rate for somebody like Warren Buffett. On the other hand, it does dramatically lower overall rates from the current rate structure by cleaning out the tax expenditures, not all of them, because in the option that is the explanatory option, you retain part of the mortgage deduction, part of the health care deduction, so that middle-income people are not adversely affected.
No, I've looked at this Simpson-Bowles tax schedule, and I think it is, as you say, tremendously oversimplified in every single press account I have seen. Once you start clearing out all those deductions that underlie the tax code, then the rates actually become real. In today's world, no one is paying the top tax rate. Absolutely no one. Every single person at that bracket level has a very significant $1 million mortgage deduction, all sorts of health care deductions, many other deductions that bring their effective rate down, sometimes into the 20s. I mean, I've seen reports from my accountant, for example, that my effective rate sometimes floats down below 30, and people think that, you know, people in my bracket, the top bracket, are paying these higher rates. Isn't that an area of detail that you need to get into, as the Commission has gotten into, in order to get to the reality of taxation?
Boy, Lawrence, you could not be more right. Look, we have, as you know, a tax system that is so larded now with exemptions, exclusions, deductions, set-asides, and invitations for, frankly, game playing, that we are hemorrhaging huge amounts of revenue. Just on the offshore tax havens, the estimate is we're losing $100 billion a year. On abusive tax shelters, the estimate is we're losing $50 billion a year as people try to reclassify their income from ordinary income to capital gains or dividend income, and, of course, all the other shell games that are played as well.
Senator, on the Simpson-Bowles report, I just want to read something in your statement about it today. You said, "I certainly would have done some things differently if I were writing it myself, but you can't have everything you want." I mean, I think that's one of the essential lessons of all of these kinds of reports is Kent Conrad doesn't get to write it himself. He's in a room with 18 other people. Half of them are Democrats, half of them are Republicans. There are people who sharply disagree with you. And what does an agreement look like? This is what an agreement looks like. And so I'm going to ask you, I'm going to invite you now to identify some of the things in Simpson-Bowles that you don't like, because I think the lesson that needs to be taught to people who analyze these reports is, yes, there are things that people who sign on to the total package don't like and wish weren't there, but they don't get to do it alone. So if you did get to do it alone, what kind of changes would you make in this?
You know, I've tried to emphasize the places where I agree with it, and I've tried to emphasize my strong support for fundamental tax reform, which I think is a clear priority for the country. I've tried to emphasize taking Social Security and making it sound for 75 years and doing it in an equitable way that actually helps people on the bottom end, gives them a boost from the current program. But if you've asked me very specifically what are things I don't like, and I'll tell you, I think the domestic discretionary cuts are too big, $1.6 trillion over 10 years. I would not cut defense and domestic discretionary spending by that amount. I would cut them, but I wouldn't cut them that severely. I believe the bigger problem in our deficit situation that we confront is on the mandatory spending side and on the revenue side of the equation. That is where we have had the biggest changes over time. Actually, domestic discretionary spending, as you know, has been dropping as a share of our national income. It has been on the mandatory side where we've seen the big increase, and it is on the revenue side that we have seen a hemorrhaging of revenue. And the result is we've got the highest spending as a share of our national income in 60 years. We have the lowest revenue as a share of our national income in 60 years. So we have to work both sides of the equation.
Senator, quickly before you go, I just want to get a word from you on that unique responsibility of the Senate to ratify treaties. The START treaty in the lame duck session, there seems to be some give developing there with Republicans. John McCain now talking about it might be possible in the lame duck. Even Senator Kyle suggesting it might be possible. Do you think it can get done, and how important is it to get done before Christmas?
First of all, I think it can get done, and I think it is critically important that we do. In discussions with members of the Foreign Relations Committee on both sides of the aisle, I don't think you can overstate the importance of this to the U.S.-Russian relationship, and I think it is critically important the message it sends to the rest of the world that the United States and the other nuclear powers are going to be responsible, that we're going to have a reduction in our number of warheads, and we're going to do it in a responsible way that preserves our deterrence.
Senator Kent Conrad, Democratic Chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Always good to be with you, Lawrence.